feel like Kobe in the fourth quarter.
This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast coming a Tuesday afternoon. It's September 26th, 2 days before the Wolves start training camp. And for today's show, we got Britt Robson back to dig into, I guess, the second half of his lengthy Q&A with Chris Finch that took place about a week or so ago. If you missed last week's episode with Britt, we dug into Finch's answers to Britt's questions about, how Finch plans to play the bigs to get more synergy with the bigs, with Cat and Gobert. Talked a lot about how to elevate Ant. Finch gave some good answers with that. And then just questions about sort of the front court depth and how the rotation might look. So that's in the previous episode. In this segment of the Britt's Q&A, it was with Finch, it was about the defense. It was about Ant navigating superstardom. Or this is what I wrote down, Britt. These are the things that stood out to me. The defense, Ant navigating superstardom, Kyle Anderson and Naz Reid as role players, the maturity of the team, and Finch's thoughts on the Gobert trade 1 year removed, which seemed like it got a little bit testy there in the back and forth. Which one of those five do you want to start with?
I actually really like the way you phrased Kyle and Naz as role players.
Different ones.
But that was not, I didn't thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. And as with all role players, depending on how well the role is defined to tailor to their skills and how often they get a chance to execute in that situation, they have a possibility of being incredibly influential or largely disappointing.
Sure.
I mean, that's the thing about role players is it's kind of up to the coaching and the situation to make the role player thrive in their role. And Kyle Anderson was given the perfect set of circumstances to do that last year. And my question to Finch in the interview is, can he do it for an encore? And even if he does do it for an encore, is that a good thing?
Right.
And then when it came to Naz, I frankly came out of the Naz thing. I don't think they still really have a great conception of what they're going to do with Naz. I mean, is that your sense?
But how could they? How could they? That's what we all do this thing where we're like, it was really good before Naz got hurt. And I always say this, it was 3 games. And everyone knows that's no shade on Naz for me. Like, I'm team, I'm about it. But how could they? It was in the context of Carl just coming back, clearly slower, did not have lower body strength. I mean, Carl was a shell of himself.
Right.
Naz
and Ant was injured too. He was out at least one of those games.
Yep. That's true. It was the.
So there was all kinds of room.
Which is exactly. So it's 3 games. And in the context of those 3 games, when it quote unquote worked, a bunch of shit was weird, Yeah. So I don't think they can know what the Naz thing is or will be. And now if they wouldn't have brought him back in free agency, then they go, well, we didn't have enough information on the Naz thing. We decided not to commit $13 million a year to him because we're not sure exactly what it looks like. But for me, because they did commit to that, they did sign him to the contract extension, that signals that they have an idea, maybe not a good one yet, and they need to kind of figure that out along the way. Like, I think everyone really anticipates Naz to be a huge piece of this, but I don't think that's any guarantee. Like, he's in the 9-man rotation, and I think people are kind of putting him and Kyle together as like the 6-7. If it's funky at all, if Naz isn't getting better as a defender, or if he can't handle as much as that defending on the perimeter as a 4, or if he isn't getting better as a defensive rebounder, then yeah, maybe he is more like the 8th or 9th man, and maybe that goes up and down over the course of time. But does that make sense? I'm kind of with you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of my issues. And then there's the factor of you've got $52 million committed to one guy, or was it 42? I guess it's 42 for 3 years.
Which guy?
And you've got $9 million committed to the other guy, and that's gone this year.
Yep.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
So if you're talking about who Finch leans into, from what I can tell, both last year the way he used him, the way he talked about him during the offseason, and the way he talked about him to me, is this a guy on an expiring contract on a team that is pressed right up against the cap? And in the new NBA will be extremely hard to,
retain.
shoehorn in.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that I think Finch loves Kyle Anderson, and I think he will rely on him as a first resort a lot anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Screw the grand plan. When a coach trusts a player and the player pretty much is delivered, that's really, really hard to turn away from.
Mm.
And on the other hand, there's all kinds of good front office reasons for slowly easing Kyle Anderson to the perimeter of your plan. That's going to be a fascinating dynamic, I think, coming around. And that's why I asked the question. I was kind of trying to gauge his. I mean, he literally said it to me, he said it to the media, he said it to JJ Redick. The phrase is Kyle Anderson saved, he said it to you. He said Kyle Anderson saved our season last year. That's an enormous thing to say.
He also said to me, Britt, like, maybe we need to set his like minutes per game total down lower. I don't remember exactly what he said,
Right,
but it was like,
right.
he's like, maybe it's like 18 rather than it was 26. Maybe it's 20 instead of
Right,
26.
right.
I think he has to do that for himself. I think he needs to carve out a lower number for Kyle because he knows that
Right.
there will be times where Kyle played like full quarters a lot, like last season, or was out for 2 minutes and right back in because he is and was the stabilizer, I guess.
Right.
Last season, and Finch, whenever he needed stability, went back to that. I think his hope is that's not the only place he can go to for stability this season on the roster.
And certainly Mike Conley fills that role as well or better. The problem is Mike Conley is in like season 77. I mean, he's got the whole deal himself. In some ways, I see, a rotation of Mike Conley and Kyle Anderson as like the organizing adults in the room or in the half court.
Mm-hmm.
Take your pick. And then I see Naz as like a remnant of the Iowa Wolves deal. The people who just go and fly around. Mm-hmm. And Finch is intoxicated by that too, as well he should be. I mean, I love it too. I'm clearly intoxicated by it. In fact, I should have been a lot bigger Naz.
About time.
Well, I mean, I'm intoxicated by fly around. I was less intoxicated by Naz. I mean, we've had this discussion. I'm long past trying to defend my Naz dislike because it was silly in retrospect. But all that said, and as you just pointed out, there's still a lot to prove here. And Naz is, every time I see him now, it's so interesting. All last season when I looked at him, and it only got more this way as the season went on, he's like a sylph. Well, the way I described it in the column last year, he's like an italic of what he used to be, And he's got that blade-like physique now that is intoxicating in and of itself, thinking, wow, this guy can fly now. Mm-hmm. And he's big, but he's also a 4/5 that's going to have to bang bodies sometimes. And even when he weighed 270 pounds, he wasn't really good at that. So, that's not that the jury is out. The jury is in. The guy is getting paid a ton of money. Yeah. So the jury is in. But the verdict remains very close at the moment.
Right. Well, the verdict in the context of this roster, right? And how you can turn this guy who came into the league as a center. I was looking through it this morning because Finch said in his answer to you, a lot of minutes at the 4. That's what it's going to be for Naz. Like, that's going to be the main thing. And I was looking through it on Cleaning the Glass. Year 1, 100% of his minutes at center. Year 2, 100% of his minutes at center. Year 3, 100% of his minutes at center. Last season, 86% of his minutes at center. I don't know if it's 100 was exactly right on those. There was a couple minutes
those
here and there.
Always a little funky, right?
Yeah,
but
that's probably
those
true.
Numbers, those numbers are still enormous enough that even if there's wiggle room, you're still operating in the fact that this dude is a center for every season of his career.
And he had to become an italic, to use your term, to be able to probably guard and move on the perimeter. As an aside, you know who else is looking like an italic? I saw Luca Garza at Tim Connolly's ping pong fundraiser thing last night.
Oh, cool.
Super thin. And I said that to you, or on here after Summer League. I think he's lost like another 8 pounds since Summer League. I mean, it is very much in the same body transformation mold as Naz.
That's amazing. And you know, he's so adaptable. He's so willing to do what he needs to do. My question there is, quite frankly, it all comes down to me. The two people I think of are Wally Szczerbiak and Cat, in the fact that Luca Garza runs, at least. I haven't really given a good look at his feet, but he runs as if he has enormous feet. You know what I mean?
He's got the cinder block foot run.
Exactly. And I don't know if that translates, if you get rid of a tremendous amount of poundage and you sculpt your body, whether you can still get past those enormous feet, or running flat-footed. Szczerbiak used to run like the floor should have shook when Szczerbiak was running down the court. And some guys just have that, clodhopper run. And Garza certainly had it last year. Was one of the things I think that really hurt him in transition. So what I'm wondering about is, how does this translate? Does Luca Garza is he the second coming of Naz Reid, and just exactly what this team doesn't need, quite frankly.
But it's good for him, and if
they're all trade chips. At the end of the day, they're under. You got the people.
Well, and Cat's going to be in foul trouble. Cat has a history of being hurt. Rudy's in his 30s now. Rudy's not going to play 82
all
games.
Good points. Good points.
I think I would be interested to see. You don't want anybody to get hurt, but I'd be interested if there was like a 2-week run of time where Garza's like in the rotation every game for like 17 minutes. I'd be really interested to see that, and I think it would be telling, because his italicism would either show up or be exposed. But we're talking about Naz.
Yes.
One other thing I took from Finch talking about him was him wanting. He talked a lot. He talked a lot about Naz. His answers about Naz are really long, and he talked about these like different ways to be more of a playmaker and a passer, and he talked about running the floor, not being the trail big like Cat does. And I got through the Naz section. I was like, I think Finch wants Naz to shoot fewer threes. Did you
at
get that?
At the very least, he wants him to be somebody who is not a scorer first. Okay. I mean, he flat out said he's not going to get as much playing time probably this year as he did last year in many respects. And again, I think that's the Cat health thing and the Kyle, to be honest with you, competition. But also, I think it's just this idea that if he does get fewer minutes, he thought that Naz played was something to prove last year, and what he was proving was, I deserve a contract. He wants that something to prove to be more organic and less show this year, I think. He wants him to, all the things he talks about with Ant, make the right play, don't, get off the ball when you need to, do something for people, space the floor, run a lot. It's funny, some of the things he talked about in transition are exactly what he wants out of Cat. And when I mentioned, does it help to have Cat and Naz kind of be the same player in many respects, and especially in terms of defense. Before I could even get, the full sentence out, he was going, yes, yes, yes.
That
like,
helps.
It helps that when you have a same type of player, you can run your system in a more systemic fashion. So I think that is to Naz's advantage.
I think they're stylistically similar as offensive players too. And Cat
except for the three. I mean,
no,
they're right. Finch is right about the fact that Naz, he has that shrug three, and when it goes in, man, it looks great. I mean, it's that high arc.
Well, that's what I'm not saying. The quality
Cat is beautiful. Cat is a beautiful shooter.
Absolutely. Let me clarify that. In how and where they play, like a lot of Naz's game is like offensively is forced down the middle of the lane on the roll. You know, he has an off the bounce game to be able to attack the basket, as does Cat. They shoot threes at the same frequency. I looked this up, and Cat's highest volume 3-point year, 41% of his shots were threes. Four in every 10 was a three. Last year was his second highest of his career for 3-point rate. It was 35% of it. And Naz had the exact same 3-point rate, 35% of his shots as well. Cat is a career 40% 3-point shooter, where those shots are significantly more contested than Naz's are.
Right.
But Naz is, for his career, rookie year, 34%, second year, 36%, third year, 35%, fourth year, 35%. That's 3-point percentage. So Naz in the half court, you know, like if it's not a really clean, wide open three, that's not a great like return point per possession, you know? So I again, and I'm extrapolating some of this off of what I thought the tenor was of Finch, is wanting him to do other things, tap into his athleticism more than his shot, because the athleticism is greater than the shot, and then hoping that more passing can be part of his offensive game there too. And I think there's probably, if we're being realistic, there's some concerns there around turnovers with Naz when he's again kind of like Cat too, making some crazy flingy passes, you know. But yeah, broadly similar, like the poor man's Cat that Gerson Rosas once billed him to be. Yeah.
As you were talking, it made me, imagine some of the things you were talking about. And one of the things I remember is that I think it works really well when Naz is in the corner, because I think he shoots the corner three better than the above the break three. I don't know if that's true, but I also think I remember a lot of times some of my favorite stuff is Naz going baseline after having hit a three or two.
Sure.
And he those baseline drives, because he has such a wicked crossover dribble, and he is big and he is fast now. Sure. So the kind of action I would like to see Naz be in is secondary action in the half court, where he's in the corner and he either has a wide open three or he has a potentially wide open three that he up fakes and turns into a slam, or into a baseline drive and a slam for somebody else.
Just looked it up. 36 from the corner, 36 from above the break last year.
There you go. Okay.
Which is all that what we're saying is he's a mediocre. I mean, for a center, or a big. I guess he's not center anymore. For a big, it's a nice resource to have. They gotta kind of close out on it, but there's always that balance, right? Like, okay, our big can shoot, but he's also big. Where is he going to serve his greatest purpose? And that's what they're going to need to define for Naz just this season in general, as he's playing, again, a new position.
What I would love to see, and I think this may be also where Finch is getting to, is Naz was a fantastic dribbler, but most of the time that dribbling was playground dribbling, which meant he was heading for the rim with those dribbles. He was not thinking pass.
Right.
And if Naz can do that cool crossover and has now the rep of being somebody, that if he can dish to the corner or hit a cutter on the weak side or whatever, that I think is going to make Finch smile. And that's bad news for Kyle Anderson, because that means all of a sudden you've got a little bit more of that playmaking that you don't have to rely on Kyle for.
Well, I don't think it's ever bad news for Kyle. I think it just means you move him further down the food chain. And it's more
that's bad news for Kyle.
Yeah. Right, we talked about that last. Yeah, I do actually agree with that. I think we have the history of last season, but also his history in Memphis of his numbers being better at the four than at the three. Britt, while I got you here, let's let's pump that. Let's pump the live event at Falling Knife again here. I'll put that up on the screen. Again, October 14th, we're calling it Wolves Fest 23, or Falling Knife is calling it Wolves Fest 23. We're just gonna hang out at Falling Knife, kind of late afternoon into when the Wolves play the Knicks at 6:30 that night. We'll have the game on the projection screens and all that, but kind of like 4 o'clock. Want it to be like as you're seeing if you're watching on YouTube on the video here, just a bunch of fans at the brewery in Wolves gear to kind of kick off the season. Come at like 4 o'clock, 5:30. Me and Britt will get going. We'll do a live show. We'll take some questions, and then at 6:30 the game starts, and we'll hang out like we did last year. I think we did it last year when they played Miami in the preseason. So I'm looking forward to doing this again. It'll be, I guess that'll be 11 days before the season starts. We'll be right in the thick of training camp and the preseason. So it should be a fun time to just kind of get everybody out and hang out and all watch a game together, which is something we don't often get the chance to do when the season's going and we're at the games and doing all that. So please come October 14th at Falling Knife. Come about 4 o'clock. We'll start recording at 5. Game at 6:30.
And one of the things I like about
is it the beer?
Well, no, I mean, I was thinking the fact that I always mention the beer, so this time I may mention something else because I really like the fact that the engagement gets a little bit more spirited with the audience compared to some of the other forums we do. I mean, it's less. We got people coming in with some opinions that some of them are just fucking off the wall, and and some of them are really smart. Yeah. But it's really fun to. There's a feeling in the air that you can air out whatever you got in mind, sure. And I love that kind of atmosphere because I'm, if somebody's airing out toward me, I'm airing too.
Right.
And so it's just. If you're interested in an unbridled conversation, I think this is one of the best places to do it.
Absolutely. And we'll give you a mic while we're recording too.
That's right.
If you want to ask some questions. Last year it was heavily loaded with Gobert fueled anger. Gobert trade fuel anger. So we'll see where everyone's at this year. I think it's starting to sink in that this is what it is, and
right.
And the effort to overly, dwell on what the fact that the picks were or wasn't. I mean, it's part of the more broader conversation. We talk about that all the time. I'm just saying for me this year, like in general, I'm gonna talk about the team as if Rudy Gobert is on the team and he is playing for the team, and what can we best do, or what can they best do to make
but
this
which I guess, if you're asking me to hop around on topics that were on your list, This would be a good intro into the end of it, what'll be part 5, which will come out on Media Day, Thursday. And what happened there was I didn't realize we had been going so long. I tried to imagine 45 minutes to an hour. Well, as it turns out, I started asking Finch some stuff around the 70-minute mark, an hour and 10 minutes in, because we had just had, I first of all, I admire the guy. I think he's incredibly smart. I think he is fearless in terms of getting into stuff. Mm-hmm. And so after 70 minutes, I was playing with house money. I didn't want to feel like a bobo walking out of that interview after so long without letting him hear a couple of things on my mind that were not charitable toward him and the organization, mostly the organization, but indirectly and sometimes directly him. So, and one of those things was, I'm sure, people are tired of this because I bring it up, and people who dislike Gobert more than I do bring it up more than I do. But what would the Wolves roster look like if the trade hadn't been made? I mean, the Walker Kessler thing is really the trump card there, because you get a lot of what you wanted to get from Gobert, and you get it cheaper without all that stuff that you gave away. But also, I add the Conley nah for D'Lo trade to the existing roster mix, and then you say you can do things with the Pat Bev, Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt troika. Keep them or dump them, but that's asset acquisition. Anyway, I trotted that out for Finch. I said playing devil's advocate, and to some extent it was, but to some extent I'm the devil.
You're
there.
serving as the devil.
So, and I mean, predictably, he said, I have not thought about that at all. And he voiced a pretty strong defense for Rudy. And I think it's genuine. I mean, I do think it's occasionally, I don't think they were his most enlightening answers to that. I think a lot of it was stuff that it was a watered down version of what he said when Rudy was traded, So, but I do think, to your point, the Gobert haters, the statute of limitations on doing what I did to Finch at the end of this interview should be over. I mean, I think that when training camp opens in, later this week, if you're still, saying, oh, you're bitching about the deal or whatever, then, all you're doing is creating woe for yourself. It's like the people who always come on and tell me, the Wolves are going to suck anyway, or they're going to do this. I mean,
right.
As somebody who's covered the team since 1990 and given the performances of the team over that period of time, I've heard that argument or that sentiment probably more than anybody on earth when it comes to this franchise.
I agree.
And all I can say is, if you're going to come in with that attitude, you're just a masochist. And if your masochism gets off on it, all right, less power to you, in my opinion. But it's all right with me if you want to be a sad sack about it. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to watch the games and enjoy basketball and all its intricacies. And yes, part of the intricacies is, can Gobert fit? And last year the answer was not often enough. But we do have a year of information. We do have this other stuff. And we also have a little bit more urgency. I mean, one of the things I don't forget it because it was the interview I had with Finch last year, but he said kind of, we'll figure it out as we go along. Yeah. And then Gobert was pushed from international play. Cat got some, mysteriously bad injury, illness. And, the first time we saw him together was the final preseason game against the Nets. And then we just both went, holy shit, this looks awful, Right. And so that's a long-winded answer, but the point being, let's discuss Rudy Gobert in realistic terms. He obviously still has a lot to contribute. What I think the conversation should now be about is, how do we synergize his strengths team-wide, and how do we either modify or lessen his weaknesses team-wide? That's the discussion that needs to happen around Gobert now, I think.
I think that is a great way to put it. And I've been thinking about this. I rewatched Game 5 of the final game from the playoffs. Sure. And Jack and I did the episode on that yesterday. And watching that game, I said this yesterday, but Rudy got going in the second half, particularly in the fourth quarter of that final game. And it was because Denver started putting two on Ant right away. Every possession, that was the goal. We got to get the ball out of his hands. And then Ant obliged, largely after being super aggressive for the first 3 quarters. But it was like James Harden level. Remember when they would, 30 feet? Yeah. And Ant was like, all right. And you try and hit the roll man, you try and swing it. And Rudy would just kind of trickle down to the dunker right in front of the rim. And he got a bunch of easy dunks from that because, frankly, he wasn't being paid attention to that much. Right. Because somebody had to not be. And was thinking about watching that, and then I've been having a couple conversations with people about Jaden McDaniels, this contract, and like what is his role? What some of what we've talked about, and this whole idea that there's no more usage available, right? We say this all the time. Ant's going to play more, or is going to get more usage as an ascending star. Cat is going to play all year, hopefully, or more than last season. There's just not this usage there, and I still think it's like you still want Jaden to maintain where he was, or at least go up a little bit. I think Mike Conley knows how to like gear shift down to neutral to allow that to happen. And then I think it's fine if Rudy goes down a bit. And if there's a handful of those games, as happened a couple times last year, where he takes like two shots in the game. Okay. Not if they're putting two on Ant. If they're doubling Ant, then it's like game 5. He needs to punish that. Those switches, make him present himself in the dunker spot at the rim, get those dunks. But if they are defending this team honestly, as I think a lot of teams will do, then it's okay if Rudy is the lowest usage guy in the starting lineup by the technical valuation of usage rate, or just broadly. Like that can come down a little bit, and that doesn't mean you're marginalizing him. How about then that energy and that focus and that development and growth from Rudy comes from the defensive end and
being more versatile, because we know he's
exactly.
great at what he does.
Mm-hmm.
What Finch wants, and what I would love to see, is I love to see Rudy be up and drop as well as Naz does. You know, I mean, that is if you talk about defense, the one thing Naz can do is show on the pick and roll and get back. In fact, he's so much better at that than he is getting posted up or whatever, you know. And if I think Rudy has the capability, he's not as quick as Naz, but he's smarter than Naz in terms of anticipation, spacing, all that stuff. If you can show and retreat and use your energy there. Plus, I think that there were games where Rudy was really good on defense. And what that did is it buoyed the team and Gobert to the point where he was getting a lot better looks on offense, because he was more excited about everything going on. And the team, frankly, was looking for him a little bit more because he had given such a positive impression.
Oh, that's
it's
the
the
thing
old,
for sure.
Reward the guy at the other end and everything, and that's just a human nature thing. And that way, I mean, if Gobert comes down and blocks a shot or deters two, blows up two actions in the same half court or whatever, you go down the next time feeling like we're playing with house money here. Here's a play for you, see what you can do with it. Worst case scenario, we break even on those two possessions.
I thought it was interesting how how Finch said he does want to play Rudy up more, which is getting at what you did. He said it's a bit of a tug of war with Rudy. They really only did it against like Luca.
He did it occasionally in others. I think the Celtics was another team he may have done it on. I'm trying to remember.
I found I just went to like the Luca one pick and rolls against Luca this year, and I just want to show this to people to like distinguish what the difference is and what this looks like for Rudy. These first two possessions are against Bradley Beal, who's kind of like a Luca light point guard, right? Yep. And he drops here. This is him dropping back right there in coverage, defending at the rim. The next one here is going to be Rudy guarding a high pick and roll with Bradley Beal, and Beal's going to pull up from 3, and Rudy's going to drop here. He's not playing up in either of these two against Beal because, again, he only really did against guys like Luca. Right here, he's dropped back. It's an open 3 for Beal.
Yeah, just terrible.
Well, and that's kind of what you're getting at, right? Is the need to situationally come up. So here's a possession against Luka Doncic where he's up in coverage right there. Boom, stopped. And then he's retreating back. That's what it looks like with Naz.
Exactly. And that is, I actually think his Dallas games were some of the most encouraging because he took it, he seemed like he was enthusiastic. I mean, this is a case where I don't know whether I'm projecting my own biases onto Rudy or whether it was reality, but I really felt like there were times where Rudy didn't want to play anything other than the way he likes to play, which
Sure.
is why when I asked Finch, do you want to move Gobert up more this year? And he said, yes. My follow-up question immediately was, how does he feel about it? Because that's really kind of what I felt was the issue there. And Finch got around to kind of agreeing with me by saying it's a tug of war. And, because a legitimate excuse, he said, when a guy has done what he's done, the way he's done it for so long, so successfully, he's not going to want to change. But those kinds of changes, plus what that also does, if you've got guys like Cat and Naz as your power forward sidekicks, you're going to want to have motion among your front court players just naturally. It may not benefit you specifically that much, but it's really going to benefit, in my opinion, Cat and Naz, so long as they don't get put in
how many times did Finch reference, like, well, if we have Rudy up, then Cat can be the low man rotating down. That is Finch's dream scenario for Cat.
It is.
If he could say every possession there's a pick and roll, if I could put Cat somewhere, it's rotating as the low man to be that second line of rim defense. That's way easier said than done. It depends what direction they run it. It's how much are they attacking Cat specifically. That is like just generally why I have more concern about this team in the playoffs than I do in the regular season, because that's the exact type of thing that teams are going to pick at, is not allowing Cat to be in those spots that Finch most wants him to be there. But they really do have a roster, particularly compared to Utah, that is so much more inclined to play a more aggressive coverage. And part of that, which I'd like that he highlighted, is not just Cat and the low man rim defense. It's also 6'11" Jaden McDaniels. It's Naz Reid there. It's Kyle Anderson. I mean, those are all guys with 7-foot plus wingspans who are your low man. Back 2 years ago,
he called McDaniels the second best rim protector on the team.
And so if you can get Rudy to play up, or any of the more you can play up, I think the more comfortable Finch gets with the other four people surrounding it. Yet at the same time, like, you got to respect what Rudy's best things are. Rudy is the best drop coverage defender in the NBA, or at least prior to Minnesota, clearly.
I think he still is, to be honest with you. This team was, what was it, 8th or 9th in defense? In defensive efficiency. I mean, come on. It's who were the, Jaden McDaniels aside, who were the lockdown defenders,
It was interesting when you guys were getting into that. Finch referenced that they only gave up 11 lobs last season, which is nothing, as he said. Totally, that makes sense. That's 0.2, 0.1 something a game. But that probably meant that we gave up more things at the rim trying to take away the lob, which he's probably talking about Rudy there, right?
Right.
So I tried to
but also others. I mean, I really do think that Kyle Anderson was a lot like that too.
Sure. I think they.
Go ahead.
I think they all are but it gave up the rim more often, and so I just looked at like frequency of shots at the rim against the Wolves last season. They had the 6th most in the NBA shots allowed at the rim. I went to the previous 5 years of Utah, the 5 years before, and they were the 3rd least, the 4th least, the 5th least, the 5th least, the 5th least. So it goes from the 6th 5 years in a row being top 5, the Utah Jazz were, in fewest shots allowed at the rim, to giving up the 6th most shots at the rim a year later. I mean, that is...
And that's why Rudy Gobert seems plainly frustrated sometimes during games, because...
He's like, I'm doing the same shit, but everything else is different.
And not only that, but I can't rely on doing the same shit, because sometimes somebody's in the way, and sometimes somebody's supposed to be in the way, and they're not there. So, I mean, at least if you guys are not going to play the way you should be playing on defense, then at least get out of the way and let me do everything. I mean, I really felt like that's the way he treated most of the season. And, as much
and he
as
won 3 Defensive Players of the Year doing that. That was Utah's plan. I don't blame him at all. But this is... But this is what Finch has to do, is convince him that for the rest of the roster, that might not be the best thing here. And he talked about, which I thought was just really cool philosophically. He's like, I've noticed a change in the league, though. 3, 4, 5 years ago, teams would settle. They are now way more accustomed to playing against drop coverage, rim protecting bigs. Right. Teams are just going at guys like Rudy more. Even if it was 26-year-old Rudy, they'd be going at him more.
Because they have proven analytically, it's like the people who on the three-point shot, whoa, you're only making 33% of them, you know? Right. I mean, and they would say, yeah, but first of all, that's the equivalent of 50% from two. And secondly, the subsidiary benefit is you draw everybody out, you've got spacing. Yep. Well, same thing if you're talking about attacking the rim. Mm-hmm. Number one, you've got people having to adjust in a way that is not like what it used to be before. Sure. You've got much quicker, bigger guards, and also you get fouled. And, you know, Rudy's fouls, it isn't a coincidence that he had I think it wasn't a career high, but I think that's just because like one of his first 2 or 3 years in the league, he fouled a lot. But it's been a long time since Rudy fouled as much as he did last year. Mm-hmm. And some of it was system, and some of it was the way teams have come to attack nowadays. He still had a very low foul rate, and the Wolves, as a result, benefited from that efficiency-wise. But you're right. I got to tell you, I probably overreacted to this, but when Gobert said he was going to play for France this year, I thought, all right, you know, I thought that you were going to basically just think long and hard about what went wrong last year and figure out where you can, you know, get your 60% of the way there, and the Wolves come back with their 60% of the way there, and you have that Venn diagram of 20% that is really good.
Sure.
And instead, you don't even, you know, you want to play for France and try to repeat what happened last year. It just hit a sour note for me, and I thought Karma did a good job of eliminating France.
That's the only place you were going with that? I knew that.
No. What I was going for was Rudy needs to basically be more generous with change.
Sure.
If he is not, it's not going to be a rerun because they do have more of a sample size, and they have an interesting team this year. I mean, they got Mike Conley all year. Whenever I think of that, I just go, oh, okay. Well, that's 3 or 4 games right there that they win, that they don't win. So, I mean, I'm still kind of bullish on this Wolves team, but the Gobert synergy remains a fascinating question that you could really argue both sides of.
It's going to be such a fun one to do this year, right?
Right.
And we're going to be like 8 games in. We're going to be like, this is what it was. And we're going to have to, or this is what it's been. We have to remind ourselves that whatever the synergy of the bigs are, not just limited to Cat and Gobert, but, you know, the Naz and the Kyle pieces of all this, it's going to be something that we're going to need to patiently look at. They're going to need to patiently look at. You're going to need to, I always say, like, with all the offensive ratings and lineup combinations and all, I basically try to not use stats or lineup data at least, until 25 games into the season. And I think all this Cat, Rudy synergy of the group stuff, we need to be patient with and not crown it if like 4 games in, we're like, wow, this looks great. They're operating this awesome. And probably more likely if they're struggling and they're figuring that out too, I think we need to be patient in it. Everyone always says, oh, you know, there wasn't the continuity of last year and this and that. And I'm like, I'm so done with like hearing all of that. And every time you talk to anyone, it's that those are the excuses. We're done with that from last year. But for this season, it is going to take time to figure out what this is and find the continuity of the group before really judging it. And honestly, doing that before the trade deadline. Because you need to, whatever that be, 50 games into the season. Like 50 games into the season, if it's looking bad, you need to consider trading Carl. at the deadline. I mean, you just that is a economic need based on performance. You need to consider that, but you don't need to consider that 8 games in the season, not 10, not 12, whatever. Like, you need to give it a little bit of time. And when you really think about the nuance, which Finch goes into in thousands of words with you,
right?
If you allow yourself to dig into some of that nuance, I think you understand patience a little bit more, because there's so many different things, right, man? I mean, I have so many notes just from reading this of like little questions or thoughts I have that are going to be defined by talking to the players, talking to the coaches, watching the players, and watching the coaches this season. There's a lot to learn.
Well, this is my 3rd interview with Finch, preseason interview of length.
Yeah.
And this was the easiest one to roll out. And it's not a coincidence that it was the longest, because it is the most initially fascinating season we've had in quite some time. I mean, we're not talking about are they going to suck? What player is going to give us hope?
Right.
Or what player is ridiculous to put hope into? We're talking about whether or not aiming high was a costly endeavor rather than a smart endeavor.
Sure.
That's a whole different set of circumstances. And that's a whole different attitude. We also, not since KG, Kevin Love, and Butler, and perhaps Carl, but have we had a guy where we thought this, I mean, the arrival of Anthony Edwards is here. And if Anthony Edwards merely duplicates what turned out to be an all-star season with an asterisk, because he was named later, but it was still an all-star season. If he merely duplicates his all-star season of last year, it will be regarded as a disappointment. So when you have that in your pocket, you got a guy who you pretty much are penciling in, if not, markering in, all-star leader, one of the best, in the league. And that person isn't Cat, Rudy, Jade McDaniels, Mike Conley, the other starters.
Sure.
Well, I mean, we're not talking, are they going to finish 500? We're talking significant stuff. And that's fascinating because the clock is ticking, the salaries have risen, the cap has not. There's a lot of internal dynamics, and not for nothing, as much as I love Chris Finch, if this doesn't work this year, there will be a lot of discussion about whose head is on a platter, and usually it's the head coaches. And Cat, obviously, as you just mentioned, come February, if this team is hovering around, is underachieving in the same kind of desultory fashion it did last year, well, again, changes are going to be made. And so that's sitting here at the end of September. It's always fun to think back of how naive you were at the end of September, when it's like, even if it's like mid-November and 2 people are out with injuries, and all of a sudden Luca Garza is having a fantastic year, or whatever,
No, so many different things obviously will happen, and that happens all the time. It's what volume of them are progressive ones and which ones are, frustrations.
Very good point. And what are progressive ones, and what are things that you can bank? What are blips that, I mean,
what can you bank? What can you bank with this team?
I think you can bank on Ant being a force. Somebody who needs to be game planned, is going to be the face of the franchise everywhere he goes. You can bank on an enormous amount of attention, his Q factor, whatever you want to call it, and all the ramifications that has. I think another thing that you can bank is that Mike Conley will do the right thing.
That's it.
Well, I mean,
I mean, I don't know. I
Do
mean,
you need free free throws, to tie the game when the clock's running down? Do you
No.
need,
I meant the rest. I agree with the Mike thing, and I agree with the Ant thing. I think.
Oh, I thought you meant, is that in terms of...
No, I'm just
Mike
thinking of
Conley?
other things on the roster. I mean, Rudy being a strong rim deterrent for the team. Obviously, we know Carl is going to be a statistically significant player. I guess that's bankable, but that doesn't have the same specificities as the other ones we're listing off. I don't know what to bank about Cat. There's obviously, he's an extremely talented player. He's gonna bank some things here, but it's kind of like we don't know what that looks like. Kind of, again, to continue the Naz Cat stuff,
right?
In a way where we don't really know what is bankable from Naz this season in a new position, in a new role. Cat's in a new position, in a new role this year. I mean, it was the same new position and new role last year. He just never really got to do it for an extended period of time.
And some of it, quite frankly, is circumstantial. I mean, one of the reasons we don't know what's going to happen is somebody's role on the team. The reason I mentioned Ant and Conley, because I think those guys, their role is very, very clear to me.
Yeah.
Mike Conley is the organizer, and Anthony Edwards is the catalyst. And those are not going to change. Those two things are not going to change.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I didn't write this down to ask or anything. It's an interesting question. And more of those things will come into focus. And maybe some things that you hoped would be bankable a month into the season won't be. There's just a couple other random things I want to hit through this. I'll just kind of hop around. Loved the maturity analogy related to transition defense. I don't know if we want to spoil that, but
again, that was I poked. You said that he got a little testy. I poked him a couple of times, and and that isn't the usual nature of our relationship, but part of that was just to remind myself, if no one else, that this isn't I'm not a bobo. I'm somebody who does have some contrary thoughts, and I'm dishonest with myself and my readers if I don't raise those to a guy who can answer them better than anybody else. So it was, the line always is the Wolves are terrible in transition because they have two bigs and therefore don't have the foot speed to get up and down the floor in time. And as you and I mean, this isn't a secret between you and I, we railed against it all season sitting next to each other. They just have a terrible recognition of how to match up in transition.
So bad.
I mean, it's like they're looking for their man, their normal assignment in the middle of transition. I mean, it's like a first grade level of stupidity. And so when we see that over and over again, that's a lack of accountability, in my opinion, or when, you see bitching at the refs, or,
Can I pause you for 1 second and throw this one up? This is actually, I had this marked for yesterday's pod because it's from that game. What am I doing right here? Oops, I'm messing this all up. This is good production. Here we go. I just want to show one of those. I want to show one of those transition plays, and I just noticed this. It seems super small, but okay. So watch this play right here, Britt. All right, let's just go back. So right here, Cat kind of gets tangled up with. He's guarding Jokic, right? Gets his screen right here, gets tangled up in it. And then it's Ant. Now Ant is on Jokic. That can't happen. Just watch this play. He just gets stuck with him the whole time.
And they don't kick him out, right?
They don't kick him out. Oh, so that was a free dunk. Jeff Green just missed it. Okay, Ant's still on Jokic. It's just straight to the basket. Both two times in one possession there. And this is just we went through a bunch of these last season too, particularly with Cat and Rudy. We talked about, okay, Rudy needs to be matched up with the proper big, and sometimes Cat was like, oh, I guarded centers for 6 years. Like, I got Plumlee here, and it really is.
Which means that, like, Rudy's on Bruce Brown or something.
Yeah, exactly, And there's just, this need to be more meticulous with this team in transition because they do have the two bigs. It is about the two bigs. And then it's about the guards recognizing it's the two bigs and that they go, well, I can't guard Jokic here. Like, we need to do something. That it needs to be constantly running in your head that we can't have a cross match. We need to run back and bust it. Because if they don't, this team's going to get punked. We saw it a bunch of times last year in transition.
They need to have a smarter idea of kickouts, but I'm even talking about just deter penetration. Just deter.
Yeah.
I mean, basically sound the alarm. It's like
run back, deter.
When a fire drill, you're not looking for the right bucket. You're looking for a bucket, and so find a way to douse the fire that's happening with whatever you have handy, which means if your body is the closest one to the guy with the ball and he's heading toward the rim, get in front of him. And then as things perhaps can recover, then you can do your kick out, your realignment or whatever. But I'm just saying that there are multiple areas where initial recognition obviously is the first thing. And then the second thing is after things get calmed down to the point where you have at least 8 guys over the half court line and you can begin to figure out stuff.
Sure.
Get your matchup then, if you can, and be aggressive in your kick out. And also, like Ant, for example, also has to realize he has to be looking over his shoulder at Cat, and they need to make that kick out, quickly.
That's where it's on the guards there too, is to not just settle into accepting a cross match.
And that again, sometimes the knock on Ant on defense, Ant's been given a lot of credit for being a really good defender because people saw him on ball and motivated during the World Cup. And he's fabulous that way.
Yep.
And he's also fabulous at chase down blocks. And he's also really pretty good at contesting threes if he's in the vicinity. All those things are quickness things and athletic things and challenge things. Like, I'm going to do this.
I liked how Finch put that, though. He was like, well, he did say he needs to be a way more consistent defender. I think Anthony has to realize that his path to being an MVP level player is being the most dominant two-way player in the league. He can't pick and choose. But he also referenced coaching Drew Holiday and how Drew Holiday was such a better defender when Drew Holiday felt challenged by the guard that he was playing against. He said he sees a lot of that in Ant. And Ant needs to just turn that challenge on. I mean, it's unrealistic to say 100% of the time. Nobody does that.
Exactly.
But can it be more than end of the quarter when you're guarding Ja Morant? It needs to. That's the place where it has to start.
Or what I find fascinating, and I saw this in the World Cup and even tweeted about it, if Ant misses a couple of free throws, or if Ant screws up, you watch him play defense on the next play. It's like he's saying to himself,
well, he's going to first try and steal it in the backcourt, which is a bad idea. But sometimes he's going to get it, and then he's going to be scrambling back the whole way.
But he is definitely going to, when he does not fulfill his expectations of himself on offense, the defense goes up.
Yep.
And that is kind of, it's Ant. It is who it is. It's not good, not bad. It's just Ant.
It's maturity, and not in the pejorative sense. It's maturing and over time and figuring that stuff out. Can you just share what the 10 pounds analogy Finch did was?
Oh,
that was really good. I'll let you explain it.
Yeah, well, that was the other thing about transition defense, and this is when I knew that Finch had pretty much had enough of this devil's advocate or whatever.
Yeah.
When he
started,
advocate. And because he's not especially when he's on the record, he's not a guy who drops. He's not a language guy, not nasty language. And he said, getting back in transition or playing, defense, that whole idea it's like everybody needs to lose 10 pounds, right? We all know it. And let's face it, you're not going to lose 10 pounds unless you really give a shit about losing the 10 pounds. If you don't give a shit about losing the 10 pounds, it'll remain. But if you do give a shit, you'll lose the 10 pounds. He said we need a give a shit attitude about transition defense. And that I thought was a great analogy because everybody can relate to that. We make those kind of fundamental changes that are really willpower based on the moment comes in time where you just say, all right, I'm going to change. And I was talking about it in terms of a lack of accountability. And, he was basically saying, well, I can show him clips of bad transition defense all I want. And now what I have to do is give them the give a shit about losing 10 pounds speech because I'm putting it back on them saying, look, I can't make you flip that switch, but that switch needs to be flipped.
Do you think it will?
I think like anything else, there'll be pros and cons to it. I think there's a few people on the team that you can rely on it, and there's a few people on the team that you can rely on them being
spotty,
too different. Yeah, sometimes.
I'll say I think it's Cat and Ant. I don't.
Yes, I agree. I would
rely in that specific.
And I think actually Finch called out both, even by name on this thing. This is all in part 5, and so. But one of the things, I guess I wanted to say another thing real fast.
Yeah.
Because I know we're moving along here, but another thing I think we should take to the bank is that Jaden McDaniels will take another step. I mean, when I looked at the numbers on McDaniels, he is operating with a hand tied behind his back on offense, and he delivers anyway. And I do not think he was snubbed or got screwed. I mean, we talked about this last year when the awards came out. He fouls too much to necessarily be an automatic. I wouldn't have disagreed if he was named on the all-defensive team. But I also know that somebody who takes himself out of the action due to fouling as much as he does, that is a factor. And he does need to get better at that. And but I have taken to saying, I had a group of people at the MinnPost festival this weekend. I basically said it would not surprise me if 2 or 3 years from now, the two best players on the Wolves are 25 and 24 years old. And that's something to get really excited about.
Sure.
I mean, the trap door, the fallback position, whatever you want to call it, the bottom line is if 3 years from now, if everything else is, soggy cardboard and is fading away, you've got Jaden McDaniels at 25 and Anthony Edwards at 24, go a year beyond that, and McDaniels is 26 and Ant is 25. If you telescope out what that is probably going to look like, I would even use the word probably. Yeah. That is an incredibly strong foundation for a team.
So some people are hearing you say this and going, well, what about the Jaden McDaniels extension, which hasn't yet happened as we're recording this?
Right.
Finch did say in the interview with you, quote, he'll have a contract.
Yeah, well, that's because I laughed. And I said, how does he feel about it? Because Finch says, Finch compared him to Scottie Pippen 3 years ago. I mean, Finch, none of this is a surprise to Finch. Yeah. And Finch really appreciates him. And I'm sure, and Tim Connolly, to be fair, has always said that McDaniels will get paid. It isn't like there's some resistance there.
No, it's a negotiation that absolutely makes sense. We've said that the whole time. He's not a no-brainer max player. And in that gray of just below there, given the Wolves' tax situation, of course this is getting pinched and nickeled and dimed, and maybe we'll even go to restricted free agency. It makes total sense to me.
Right. So but all that said, you've got a guy who is just solid. He's going to be there. I think I lost my train of thought. What were we?
Well, you were
You
just
asked
sorry,
a
I cut you
question.
off. The long term, in 3 years, 24-year-old and
Oh yeah, yeah.
25-year-old.
At the age of 26. Oh yeah, they're not getting a contract. That's what it was. When I said to Finch, he doesn't have a contract because Finch was saying we try to figure out ways to increase his usage, and it just isn't there.
Yeah.
And when I heard that, I thought, all right, and here's a guy you're saying that we can't fit this guy into our usage puzzle. He doesn't even have a contract.
Right.
And Finch, like, if words could sneer, Finch sneered at that and basically said he'll have a contract. Like don't do that because that's not going to happen.
Right. Don't assume he's going to be. And that
Don't
doesn't
assume
mean
because there's no contract that we don't think Jay McDaniels is everything we think he is, and we'll hold on to him. So
right. The Jaden stuff did stick out to. I mean, he is. We didn't need to another interview to know that Chris Finch is a gigantic Jade McDaniels fan, but I mean, he seems excited about Jaden not needing to be on ball the whole time. He talked about Jaden needing to go into games last season when he was on ball all the time, thinking he had 4 fouls rather than 6 because you're just going to kind of pick up 2 if you're guarding Luca Doncic, or I think he referenced like Julius Randle.
Yeah, Julius Randle, right.
There's just those are the guys that Jaden has to guard. I think Finch's just whole thought process with Jaden is he's like, okay, wait, our quote unquote problems with Jaden are needing to have a little bit more discipline with fouling and creating a little bit more usage for him offensively down the line. Like those are champagne problems. Like that is not a concern in the grand scheme of things. He's so excited about him, and I think the only thing they need to navigate with him this year is like, hey, you're going to still be 4th or 5th in usage on this team. How do you feel about that in your 4th year, and how do they accommodate that? And again, that's another thing Finch needs to navigate. But they're just probably they need to express to him that there probably just isn't a lot more there for him. In terms of usage.
And what is great about that, in my opinion, I went through a bunch of stats with him, not in detail, but referencing. He was great. First of all, he was terrible in ISO. His points per play in ISO are really bad. It is the outlier in his offensive stats. Sure. He's really good off screens. He's really good off pick and roll ball handling. He's pretty good on spot ups. He's really good on cuts. Sure. So he has a great half-court package. And he also, after a very slow start, hit 39 plus on his threes. So, he has all this stuff. And I said, he really took a big step forward last year. And I meant it. And Finch, almost like with a smug smirk, said, and his usage increased by 1%.
Perfect.
I mean, that's like boom,
And it wasn't like he had a lot of usage the year before,
Exactly. But I mean, it's just when a guy, he was so much more prominent in the offense, and yet he did it in such an efficient way in terms of not taking thunder away from guys who need thunder.
Right.
Anthony Edwards needs thunder. Karl Anthony Towns needs thunder. If they don't have thunder, they're not going to be happy.
Right. Jaden McDaniels is lightning.
Exactly.
Very last thing, I just thought, I just got to part 5 reading it this morning. I thought just a newsworthy kind of type thing that came out from there was he kind of let you know what the rotation is going to look like, or at least what the plan is of it. Going into training camp, we know the 5 starters: Conley, Edwards, McDaniels, Towns, Gobert. And then he said he thinks it'll be 9 with Kyle Anderson, Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and Shake Milton being the 4 bench guys in the rotation, which means outside looking in, Josh Minot, Wendell Moore Jr., Troy Brown Jr., Jordan McLaughlin, Leonard Miller, and then the 2-way guys, Garza and Matt Ryan.
Right.
And Jalen Clark.
And there's not a lot of surprises there.
No.
Shake Milton, Troy Brown and Shake Milton, you didn't know how they valued those guys, although Shake obviously got more money. So, you have that.
I mean, just talking to people over the course of the summer, I mean, that is like, and granted, it was a pretty quiet off season, but that's the one you hear. Excitement about Shake. I think he's going to be. And I mean, Finch even said it direct quote.
He unilaterally brought him up when I talked about, when I was talking about Gobert and partners for Gobert and thinking Kyle was such a good partner.
Sure.
And yet, how can you, my question was, Gobert leaves early. Do you wait? You don't bring in Kyle for Gobert because you want, he's a Rudy whisperer. And he said, first of all, that Kyle also plays well. His numbers are really good with Cat too. And then he also just, apropos of nothing, it kind of shocked me because I hadn't even thought of it. He said, and Shake Milton will be a really good partner for Rudy. I went, oh, as what? As a three? And he said 1, 2, or 3. So it's clear.
But then that's what the feel of all of this is going to be. That's going to be the same thing for Nikhil. This year is going to be one. It's because the 2-3 is going to be so interchangeable. There's going to need to be one guy. Like, there's going to be times, I bet, where like Conley, Alexander Walker, and Shake Milton are all on the floor at the same time. The 1, 2, 3. Like that is how they are positioning this whole lack of a backup point guard thing. Is it's going to be a bunch of dudes in the mix. He said the job is open, but that there's a handful of guys obviously in the mix, and Kyle Anderson to play backup point guard, Shake Milton and Nikhil to play backup point guard. But he's like also, there's J-Mac, there's Wendell Moore Jr. Like, I don't get the sense that they are at all concerned about backup point guard. They have enough.
Neither am I. I got to tell you, all this hullabaloo about these guys that are getting signed, that's just it's like the Leandro Bolmero phase is what we're in now. We're in the, oh, look at that little bobble. What do you think? He played, 17 games for Houston 2 years ago. So let's,
Are you hating on my boy Vit Krejci?
Absolutely. Put it this way. If that dude becomes important, then either Tim Connelly is screwed.
Your sound cut out right. It was like I was editing you, whatever you said. I don't know. I don't think so. I think those guys, yes, are very much training camp deals. But yeah, bunch of ball handlers is just like a.
I mean, what I worry about is Jordan McLaughlin.
Yeah. Jordan's out of the rotation. He's not going to be in the starting rotation.
Exactly.
And if you need another point guard, it'll be him. Yeah. No.
And he's also one of those guys a year ago. I mean, even the playoffs against Memphis. There was a spirited debate. I know in retrospect it's kind of silly, but should he be the starter going in and D'Lo off the bench?
Oh man.
But at the very least, what you can say about the guy is the team plays well when he's on the court. I mean, it is what happened.
Not last year, but he had the calf strain and re-injured.
His net rating was still pretty damn good.
No, but he's a perfect third point guard. That's what Jordan McLaughlin is. That is a
great
achievement in the NBA to have.
Which means that I think he should be on the bench, but I don't think he should get off it very much.
Right. All right, Britt. We miss anything from your
probably
massive
but, we got a lot of time.
Tome?
And we'll be at Falling Knife. We'll probably do something before Falling Knife.
Yeah. We'll do something next week after Media Day. Today's Tuesday. Media Day's Thursday. Me and you.
Next week there'll be the games in name me the place because I confused it with 6 different
Abu Dhabi
Arab locations. Huh?
Yes, Abu Dhabi 11 a.m. game on October 5th and 11 a.m. game October 7th. So,
another 11 a.m. game.
Yeah,
right,
man,
right.
we're 9 days away from the Wolves playing a preseason basketball game.
There you go.
Is that right? So yeah, what me and you will be on here a bunch. I really appreciate you, one, just letting us talk about all of this. Again, I really want to push everyone to go check out this article. We did 2-hour-long podcasts on this Q&A with Finch, and there's a ton more in there that intentionally I kind of tried to stay away from. So, I mean, sit down with a big cup of coffee, this whatever in the nenext couple of days and just consume it. Finch is great at this stuff.
It's in serialized form.
and you got to
parts 1 through 5.
Yeah, part 1. You got to stick around for part 5 when you stab
on
him.
media day, right?
Yeah, on media day.
We'll throw it into the mix.
Okay, you can check that out over at MinnPost, obviously, and if you're looking for that, you can follow Britt on Twitter. It's on his Twitter feed at Britt Robson. Britt, I'll see you at Media Day on Thursday. Until then, he's Britt. I'm Dane. Peace out. Alrighty. Ta-da. All right.